There are a few of you I do not recognize. Again, thank you so much for being here. I know there's over 1,500 churches in the Atlanta area, and you chose On Mission. That means the world to us. And if I haven't met you, I'd love to meet you later. There's a few faces I haven't said hi to. I'd love to greet you later. My name is Mark. I'm the lead pastor here at On Mission Church. And friends, I have a friend who has authored a book. And it's a book that is, it will never be a top seller. It's never going to be on those charts, but it is on Amazon. And I want to give him a plug this morning. It's my friend back in Oregon. His name is Beto. And Beto wrote this book. And it's a book intended for kids. And this book, it's a cute book. I like this book. But really the idea behind this book is fitting for everyone of all ages. And the book is called Why Gunder Glows. You've never heard of this book, and that's okay. I'll give you a little plug this morning for this book. But it's this great book. It follows the life of a little glowworm as he goes through life, and some people wonder why he's glowing. And he has all these tests and all these trials, and it's kind of has these parallels with the fruit of the Spirit in the book of Galatians. And it's this book that I love because when we first had it, I'd read it to our girls at nighttime, just to remind them, okay, it doesn't matter if everybody is doing something, you don't have to do that thing. You've heard this from your parents growing up. Okay, it doesn't matter if everyone, the cool crowd is doing it, you don't have to do it as well. And yeah, we get that as a kid, and we kind of grow up and we think, okay, it's just for kids. Well, this book is really for adults today as well. And a reminder for us to know, even though there's temptations and pressure from society, we're not to give in. We're supposed to have this glow of the Holy Spirit as we follow Him that should shine to the world. So that is a book plug this morning, Why Gunder Glows. I love the book. And friends, it's really affordable. It's like $6 on Amazon. I encourage you guys to get it. Well, the one thing for us today, as we think about the pressures and the temptations of culture, and it's easy to absorb those things, but as Christ followers, we need to stand firm and we need to be like a stone. We'll talk about this, how this ties into the story of Daniel and his friends here in a little bit. But the one thing for you is this today. The one thing is a question. Are you a sponge or a stone? Are you a sponge or a stone? When you look on social media, when you navigate your week, are you absorbing all these things from the culture, or are you rock solid, secure in your faith? Are you like a stone? And the story is in the book of Daniel, looking at his friends who were faced with this crazy temptation to worship an idol. And to see the reaction, we're not going to get the whole story today. You'll have to come back next week to obviously continue on. But it kind of gives us an idea of where are we supposed to stand. So yes, we're looking 2,600 years ago, way back, at a situation where idolatry was presented. And there's this temptation to follow the crowd. The cool kids were doing a certain thing. Are they going to do it too? And it applies today in 2022 as well. Well, our series is called Faith Under Fire. And maybe for some of you, you felt your faith tested at work, or maybe in school, or maybe in your own home. Maybe you have somebody in your family who is against that you are a follower of Jesus. And you feel the temperature go up as you have that test when they question, well, why do you think the Bible's true? Oh, come on. There's no way you believe this stuff. And you maybe fumble as you're trying to get a defense for Christianity. And so this idea of faith under fire, yes, we feel it today. But I also want to take you to other places on earth to give you some perspective as we're going through the top 5 most persecuted countries on planet Earth, for the countries where it's most difficult to be a Christian. We're walking through the top 5. Last week was 5. This week will be 4. I want to give you a glimpse as well, because sometimes we think it's tough, but it's not really that tough to be a Christian in the United States of America. I think we make it tough, if I can be honest this morning. We're the ones who are in the way. So as we set up in this series in the 3rd chapter of Daniel, I'll give you a little context here. There are different original languages in the book of Daniel. And it goes from Hebrew, language to the Jews, to a little bit of Aramaic, and then back to Hebrew. This is important to know before we dive in today, because the passage we're in today is actually written in Aramaic. And now you can think, well, why did they do that? Why did Daniel author it this way? Why did he change things up? I think it will make sense as we roll along and look at the different verses to see, okay, now we know why this is presented in Aramaic. Well, last week we talked about they had the call to bow down before this idol, this 90-foot tall gold statue thing. We don't know if it looked like King Nebuchadnezzar. We don't know really what it looked like, but there was this call that they were supposed to bow down to this. This is something that King Nebuchadnezzar put out for all the people. So now we enter into the text today where we left off from last week, Daniel 3, verses 8 through 18. It says this in verse 8, "Therefore at that time certain Chaldeans came forward and maliciously accused the Jews." Well, who are these guys? I think Jay's version said the astrologers, which is actually very fitting. They were actually astrologers. They're very wise people. They're actually specialized in wartime combat and strategy. Very intelligent group of people. So they're kind of getting this idea, well, hold on. These three guys, something's different about these three guys. There are probably thousands of people that have gathered. The king called them all in. He's full of himself. Here's my gold thing. Bow down to this thing when you hear all these instruments. But then there's the Chaldeans. They noticed that something was different with a few people. So, of course, they want to point this out. So now, our Chaldeans, our friends, they spoke Aramaic. So this is why I think this passage is written in Aramaic. Is for the audience who's going to read this can understand, okay, this might be pertaining to these people, that they can understand this. The rest of the book is written to the Jewish people, but this specific part is written for our Chaldean friends, so they can understand what is going on here. So we think they're in a position to profit personally, but these three Jewish guys were in the way. You've heard of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So we think they were in the way. So these Chaldeans are trying to climb up in rank, and they look over, and they're like, wait, these guys, they're not going to bow down. This might be an opportunity for us to rise up in leadership. So let's present this. So it says this in verse 9. They declared to King Nebuchadnezzar, "O king, live forever." That's what every king wants to hear, right? Live forever, king. Blow him up, amplify him, live forever. "You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into a burning, fiery furnace." I read this week and I kind of chuckled. Now, are they reminding him of what he said? Did he not know, or they're just trying to say this again? Like, this is what you said. Do you remember? It's almost like this courtroom battle. Like, okay, you're presenting this. You have your case here. Before you get to the case, you want to give this little setup here in the beginning. Well, you said this right, so get a little nod from king. Like, yeah, I said that. This is important. I said that. And then now it says this in verse 12. "There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up." This would have been like a bomb drop in front of King Nebuchadnezzar. There's all these thousands of people. We don't know in this situation if it was public when they came to him and they talked to him. So now they're presenting this to the king. Okay, king, you've said this, and then there's these three guys that are not doing this. So now the spotlight is on these three guys. Now, I want to pause here and just do a quick time out to give you some understanding in this passage, because think about these three friends of Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Now, they could have had a million excuses. Thousands of people gathered around, hillside, flatland, I don't know the landscape where they were, but they could all see this 90-foot tall thing with a 9-foot base. They're all looking at it. This is a time where my creative brain, maybe you'd be doing the same thing, just thinking, well, guys, we're not going to bow down. Let's just pull the old ACL torn thing, or like, I have to go to the bathroom thing just for a few minutes while the band plays. We're going to sneak out, just going to bend down halfway, going to tie the shoe, make up some way just to make them think that, okay, they kind of bow down. They're not drawing attention, but no, that's not what we see. We see that these three friends of Daniel, they stand firm. Zero compromise. Even though I know today, you're thinking, well, we can think of some excuse. But these three warriors, they grew up soaking up the Mosaic law. They knew the Shema. They recited it as often as they could. They understood that God was one. They knew they were to hear and listen to him. They knew that God was one. Not this plurality view. There's no polytheistic ideas in what they're believing. They knew that God was one. So it was burning in their hearts. So their excuses were gone because they knew they wouldn't compromise. So now, King Nebuchadnezzar, I think he saw his gods, they were responsible for his success. So he saw all these different gods that he made up, that he worshiped, which just doesn't make any sense, but he worshiped these gods. I think he saw them as the ones who were responsible for his success. So to disrespect those gods was to disrespect him firsthand in his person. So someone that said no to this was really as shooting an arrow straight to King Nebuchadnezzar. No, I'm not saying just no to this. I'm saying no to you, king. So now it's personal to him, his own followers. This is personal. Now, something else in this text I want to highlight. These three Jewish guys, they did not do a formal protest. It could have been like, hey, we're not going to do this. We're going to proclaim this. We're going to just go walk around everybody. Look, we're not just going to have their banners waving everywhere in the sky, all their signs and megaphones and screaming, we're not going to do this. And yet they had this kind of humble approach. They just didn't bow down. It's that simple. So they just refrained from the sin of idolatry. So now their actions were visible, but they were not necessarily that public. So they took a stand, but in a unique way. They were not public, but they were also not hidden. Well, friends, if you follow Jesus, when you go through life, you will hopefully stand out at some point. It doesn't make sense to light a candle or to have a lamp and just to hide it. Like, people should know that you follow Jesus. There should be a glow about you. The Holy Spirit should shine through you when you interact with people. So here they took a stand in this humble way, in this just simple way. So now, look at this reaction. King Nebuchadnezzar has his presentation. Verse 13. Then Nebuchadnezzar is furious rage, and he commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought. So they brought these men before the king. Now, it's one thing to take a stand, and now you're in front of the king. Well, I have one question when I was reading this week. I'm sure maybe you've had the question too. Who is missing from the story? Daniel. Where's Daniel? The book is titled after him. Where is Daniel? This is a whole story about Daniel. The whole book is about Daniel. It's prophetic things in the book of Daniel, the key guy in the story of Daniel. And we're reading this about these three friends of his. And I'm reading this week, I'm like, where's Daniel? Why are you not in this story, Daniel? What are you doing? Are you hiding under a blanket, like sucking your thumb? Where are you, Daniel? This is your moment. And friends, we honestly don't know. There's a lot of people that guess, where Daniel was. Some people think maybe he was with the king. They were maybe in a separate area. He was serving the king. He wasn't there at the bowing area with the band. Maybe he hated the band and his ears plugged. Maybe the bagpipes were out of tune. We don't know what was going on with Daniel. So we can speculate and make some things up, but we're not really sure where he was. All we know is that what we know about Daniel, and if you've done any study on the life of Daniel, that he too would not compromise in this moment. We know that he would stand with his three friends. He would stand and proclaim, no, I'm not going to bow down to this thing. I'm not going to go for it. So we're not really sure. We just know that now this is the big moment. Because for some of you, you've taken a stand in front of that family member or that coworker. You've taken a stand. You say, this is my faith. This is what I believe. I believe in Jesus. You take this stand and you're proclaiming it. It's one thing to say it, and then if you get called before the boss of the boss of the boss, and then now you have to say it again. It's a whole different level at that point. So now here they are brought before him. And now in verse 14, Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, is it true? I love that statement. Is it true? Because he heard this, now he wants to confirm. This is the interview. Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up? Now, if you're standing there as your heart is beating through your chest, you're standing in front of the most powerful human on planet Earth at this point in time. You know the consequences if you don't bow down and do this thing in front of this idol. You know that there's a furnace over here that's heated up to maybe 3,000 degrees. And a lot of you know the story is going next week. What happens when we get close to that part of the story? Very hot, heart pounding through the chest, sweat dripping, your mind is racing. What can I say just to make me some sort of excuse again? I could pull the ACL thing. I could say maybe it was a potty break. I could say something. And now they're standing there and they have this interview. They can't hide anymore, standing in front of the king. So now, as I read this story this last week, I thought of another story in the New Testament, the story of Peter. Do you remember the story of Peter? Our brash, brave Peter, going to follow Jesus at all costs. Doesn't matter. I mean, people came out to arrest him, and Peter's the one that takes out the sword. He's slashing, cuts off an ear of the guard because he's so on fire for Jesus. He believes in him so much. There's nothing that could just waver his faith. And then Jesus goes on trial that night, and he's taken in. And then Peter's out by this fire, and a little girl says, "Aren't you with him?" No, not me. No, I just warm my hands by the fire. Little frostbite going on here. Not me. No. 3 times, our brave Peter denies Jesus. And now we look at this situation. And Peter didn't learn from this. Look at this situation now. These 3 Jewish guys, they have this choice. Serve those gods or worship the one true God. What is he going to do? What are these guys going to do? Now, the golden image was not necessarily considered a god. There's an interesting phrasing here. Maybe it's a play on words to convince them that it was not so bad. Guys, it's just a gold thing. Like, just go down, come up, we're good, wash the hands, kingdom's under control, everybody's good, you can still have your leadership roles. Now, let's see what they do. Because I think this here is more of a political issue than religious. So we're looking at treason here. High crime of treason. In verse 15 it says this: "Now if you are ready when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music to fall down and worship the image that I have made, well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into a burning, fiery furnace." So now, I think behind this has very little to do with this idol. It has very little to do with this statue and this image. I think it has everything to do with worshiping King Nebuchadnezzar and his giant ego, which is behind the whole thing. That's the premise behind this. And you see this so often with people in leadership, political leadership, even in church leadership. Heads get so big. They get so big, they think it's all about them. So it really had very little to do with that. It was more like, hey, this is disobedience to me. A lot of you know about the temper and the rage of this guy. There are many stories about King Nebu. I mean, this guy was bad. He was a bad, bad man. So here they are standing before him with this choice. And I think he said this very clearly to them. He's very crisp with his words. Others are looking. There's pressure from every angle. But friends, as they at this moment, they could have been just soaking in all these things. They could have soaked in and said, it's just for a short season. We're going to soak this in. We're just going to do this and get it over with. But no, they lived the Shema. They lived this. It wasn't just something they said. They lived this out. They were absorbing this since they were kids. They absorbed the Shema. They recited it. They said this over and over. To love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, and your strength. And they knew this. And they knew that God was just one. Now, the question of all questions happens here. And he says this. He says, "Who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands?" Who is the God? At this point, he's saying, okay, there are probably no gods, lowercase g. None of them can. So you see his position and his thoughts of where he reigns. He thinks he's above all. Which one of these gods, all these different gods we worship, this whole idol thing, all these things we believe, he's just not talking about the God Yahweh. He's talking about any God. He's like, no, none of them can. He asks this question: who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? Well, he's saying that no, there are no gods. Well, look at Daniel 2:47. We don't have this on the screen. But there's a point in the story where King Nebuchadnezzar, in the 2nd chapter, he actually testified to the sovereignty of Yahweh. We saw Daniel and his friends have this temptation, or they're fighting all this new culture they're in. They're interpreting dreams like Daniel's doing, and they're rising up in leadership. And there was a point where King Nebuchadnezzar actually testified to the sovereignty of Yahweh. It showed that he actually believed in some ways in their God. He knew that their God had power. So something was different. But friends, for us, maybe this speaks to some of you this morning. I know so many people that believe that God inspired the Bible. They think that the Bible is inspired, but they don't believe that God can deliver them from their serious personal problems. So he's inspired Scripture, but the cancer and the issues that you're facing, the difficulty you're going through, God's not big enough to deal with that. So when you believe, are you all in your belief? Do you believe everything about God? Or are these just these teeny little nuggets of truth that you've gained about him? Well, we see here King Nebuchadnezzar, all of a sudden you can just tell he didn't really believe. He had this moment. He's like, okay, your God's powerful. Then he goes back to his ways and all these other gods and idols. Well, it says this in verse 16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter." You know why they said that? Because they had someone who would answer for them. Because they knew that God would do the answering. They didn't have to have the answer. God was the one who was going to do the answering. Wow. And in verse 17, if this be so, our God whom we serve is able, key word, look at this, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace. And then we see another word, will. And he will, this is important, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, yes, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. I hope if I'm in this moment someday, I have a fraction of this kind of confidence in my God. I mean, just to his face, most powerful guy in the world. Nope. Not doing it. Zero compromise. But these key words, I want to highlight these. This is really important. Able and will. He's able to deliver them out of the furnace. But he will deliver them out of the king's hands. So whether life or death, they will be out of the grip of King Nebuchadnezzar.
That's good.
So you see this whole concept with able, God could, and a lot of you, maybe you wrestle in your prayer life, you don't know how to pray. Because sometimes in these conservative theological circles, we get afraid to pray in confidence because what if God doesn't show up? Well, we're supposed to pray in faith that God will heal. We're called to do that. But sometimes God just says no. Sometimes he says not now. Sometimes he says maybe. And then sometimes there's the yes. We don't know how he's going to answer. But in some of those ways, God steps up. They didn't even ask for a miracle. They're not on their knees, just like, God, can you please? They're just like, they were just willing to give it all for him. In Job 13:15, Job says this, though he slay me, yet I will trust in him. And I think about this here in this passage. They're just ready. They don't even care. They knew that to honor God, to honor Yahweh was better than life. And so that was the confidence that they stood on. That was their stone. That was their foundation that they had memorized and written on their hearts. They loved the Lord more than life. In verse 18, I love this. It says, but if not, if we get torched, if we get fried, they will still give their life for him. Often, friends, we complain about our rights and what is fair. These guys knew they're just giving up everything at this point. Often, it's just best to make a stand and endure these hardships and let God just figure it out. We're not God. We can't play God. So they realized that maybe their plans didn't line up with his will, so they weren't sure. So I encourage you, when you pray for the will of God to be done. It's okay to ask for those requests and to ask for the pain to be gone and to ask for spiritual healing, physical healing, everything in between, but also ask for it to be God's will because we want to line up our prayer life with his will. Oftentimes we ask for things that maybe are a little bit selfish. I've got 3 kids. It's cute to hear their prayers, but sometimes it's just hilarious. It's tough to not bust up laughing at the dinner table when you hear these requests that come in. And you're like, God, that is so cute. If you did, that'd be cute, but we understand they might be spoiled. So if you didn't, I would get it. Just deny them in a cute way. Just let mom and dad deal with it. Just say no. You know, at Christmas time, this always happens. I'm sure you've been there as well. So trying to pray according to God's will. Well, friends, I want to remind you that the early Christians, most of them were not persecuted and killed because of what they believed in. It's because of what they didn't believe in. They didn't bow down to some emperor or some idol. They didn't give in to some other agenda. And so that's usually that's what's coming into play in this story. And friends, I want to remind you too, this might be a little bit morbid this morning, but I want you to hear me. All of us have to die. Unless Jesus returns, all of us are going to pass away.